He said my name like he had been searching for it through 10 winters, and I hated myself for still knowing exactly how to break for him. The bell above the door of Blue Lantern Books and Coffee gave its soft, familiar chime just as Elliot Hayes was turning the sign to closed. Outside, snow drifted down over Burlington in slow silver sheets, dusting the sidewalk, the parked cars, and the blue awning he had promised himself he would repaint before Thanksgiving and had absolutely failed to touch. Inside, the shop glowed with the kind of warmth people stopped to photograph: amber lamps, crowded shelves, mismatched chairs, the cinnamon smell of day-old muffins, and Milo, his overweight white cat, asleep on top of the radiator like a tiny retired landlord. Elliot had one hand on the deadbolt and the other wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold when the man stepped in from the storm. At first, all Elliot noticed was the shape of him, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a charcoal coat speckled with snow, carrying a black leather tube of architectural drawings beneath one arm. Then the man looked up. The years fell away so quickly Elliot almost reached for the counter to steady himself. Caleb Whitmore stood 3 feet inside his bookstore, older now, sharper around the jaw, his light brown hair damp from the snow, his eyes still the same impossible gray-blue that used to make Elliot forget every sensible thing he had planned to say. For a moment, neither of them moved. The old floorboards creaked under Caleb's boots. The espresso machine clicked as it cooled. Somewhere in the back, the heater gave a tired groan, as if even the building understood that the past had just walked in without knocking. Caleb's lips parted, but no greeting came out. He only stared, not like a stranger trying to place a face, and not like a man confident enough to claim an old memory. He looked wrecked by recognition, as if Elliot were a song he had not heard in years but somehow still knew by heart. Then, barely louder than the snowfall brushing the windows, Caleb whispered, "Elliot." The mug slipped from Elliot's fingers and hit the floor with a dull crack, coffee spreading across the pine boards in a dark, uneven bloom. He should have said something clever. He should have asked what Caleb wanted, why he was here, why he had stayed gone for 10 years, why one whispered name could still open a locked room inside him. Instead, Elliot stood there with his hand frozen near the deadbolt, his chest tight, his throat burning, and his carefully built life trembling around him like a paper house in bad weather. Caleb took one step forward, then stopped himself, noticing the shattered mug, noticing Elliot's face, maybe noticing that some doors did not get to swing open just because someone finally came back. "I'm sorry," Caleb said, his voice low and unsteady. "I thought the shop was still open." Elliot let out a small laugh that did not sound like him. "It closed 10 years ago," he said before he could stop himself. Caleb blinked, and pain moved across his face, quiet but unmistakable. Elliot hated that he saw it. Hated more that a part of him still cared. The storm pressed against the windows. The shop smelled like coffee, old paper, and every memory Elliot had spent a decade trying to shelve where no one could find it. Caleb looked at the broken mug as if it had accused him of something he could not remember, and maybe that was the worst part. Elliot knew how to handle anger. He had rehearsed anger for years, polishing it in quiet moments while restocking shelves, wiping tables, and pretending certain songs on the radio did not make his hands go still. What he did not know how to handle was Caleb Whitmore standing in his doorway with snow melting on his shoulders and confusion softening the face that had once ruined him. "I will clean that up," Caleb said, already reaching for a napkin from the counter. "Do not," Elliot said too quickly. The word came out sharper than he meant it to, and Caleb stopped at once, one hand hovering in the air before he slowly lowered it. Good, Elliot thought. Let him stop. Let him learn that he did not get to walk back into this place and touch things. Not the floorboards. Not the coffee. Not the life Elliot had built from all the pieces Caleb left behind. He grabbed a towel from beneath the counter and crouched to soak up the spill, grateful for the excuse to look away. The coffee had spread toward Caleb's boots in a crooked little river, dark and warm and impossible to put back into the cup. Milo lifted his head from the radiator, opened one unimpressed blue eye, and gave Caleb the offended stare he reserved for late deliveries and people who moved chairs without permission. That cat always judge customers like that? Caleb asked softly. Elliot hated that the question almost made him smile. Only the suspicious ones. Fair, Caleb said. I probably look suspicious. Elliot stood with the wet towel in one hand. You look like someone who came into a closed shop during a snowstorm. Caleb glanced at the window, where Church Street had blurred into a soft white haze under the streetlights. I saw the lamp on. That is not how business hours work. A faint, careful smile touched Caleb's mouth, gone almost as soon as it appeared. No. I guess it is not. Silence settled between them again, but it was not empty. It was crowded with 10 birthdays Elliot had celebrated without him, 10 winters of shoveling the sidewalk alone, 10 years of telling Nora that he was fine whenever Caleb's name appeared in some architecture magazine or local article about talented young designers restoring historic buildings across New England. Elliot turned toward the sink behind the counter and rinsed the towel with hands that refused to stop shaking. What do you need? He asked. Caleb shifted the leather tube under his arm. I am working on the Starlight Theater restoration. Elliot froze. Of course. Of all the buildings in town, of all the boarded-up places with cracked windows and forgotten signs, Caleb had come back for that one. The theater where they had shared popcorn from the same bucket during midnight showings. The theater where Caleb once traced constellations on Elliot's palm and said he wanted to build beautiful things one day. The theater where Elliot had believed him. The mayor said you keep the town archives, Caleb continued. Old newspapers, photographs, records. She said if anyone could help with the history of the building, it would be you. Elliot turned off the faucet. The mayor talks too much. She also said you make the best coffee in town. She lies when she wants funding. Caleb looked down, and this time his smile stayed a little longer, tired and almost boyish. For one dangerous second, Elliot could see the teenager he had loved inside the man standing there. Then the second passed, and Elliot remembered the letter. The envelope. The sentence that had lived under his skin for a decade. I cannot build a future around you. Come back tomorrow, Elliot said. During actual hours. Caleb nodded immediately. No argument. No charming excuse. No attempt to make the moment smaller than it was. All right. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand near the handle. Elliot, I know this sounds strange, but have we met somewhere besides here? Elliot's breath caught so hard it hurt. He stared at Caleb's back, at the careful tension in his shoulders, and realized the man was not pretending not to know. He truly did not understand the shape of the damage between them. Elliot's voice came out quiet. Yes, Caleb. We have. Caleb turned slowly. The sound of his own name seemed to strike him with the same force Elliot's had. I thought so, he whispered. Elliot wanted to ask what he remembered. He wanted to ask why he left. He wanted to ask whether Caleb had ever looked back. Instead, he opened the door and let the cold rush in between them. Tomorrow, Elliot said. Caleb stepped out into the snow, and the bell chimed behind him, gentle as a warning. Only when the door locked did Elliot sink onto the stool behind the counter, press both hands over his face, and finally let himself breathe like someone who had been holding the same breath for 10 years. Morning came with the kind of quiet that only follows a heavy Vermont snow, when the whole town seems to hold its breath under a clean white blanket. Elliot arrived downstairs at 6:30, wearing an old navy sweater, wool socks, and the expression of a man determined to behave like the previous night had been a mild inconvenience instead of a personal earthquake. He shoveled the 3 feet of sidewalk in front of Blue Lantern Books and Coffee, salted the step, unlocked the door, and told himself with every ordinary task that he was still in control. By 7:15, the shop smelled like dark roast, toasted bagels, and the vanilla candles Nora kept insisting made the place feel less like a literary cave. By 8, the regulars had arrived, Mr. Alvarez with his crossword puzzle, Beth and June from the florist next door, and Benji Cole, Elliot's 22-year-old part-time employee, who came in late carrying a tray of donuts as if sugar could erase bad punctuality. "You look haunted," Benji said, squinting at Elliot over the pastry box. "Did Milo knock over another display, or did a handsome man with unresolved emotional baggage walk into your life?" Elliot nearly dropped the milk pitcher. "You are here to work." "That means yes." "That means wipe table 4. Benji grinned and saluted with a jelly donut. Elliot was still pretending not to watch the door when Caleb arrived at 9 exactly. Not 9:01. Not 9:15 with some charming apology. 9 exactly, as if punctuality were a peace offering. He had changed into a dark green sweater beneath his winter coat, and he carried 2 things, the leather tube from last night and a small paper bag from Maple Street Bakery. Elliot recognized the logo immediately. Blueberry muffins. The good ones. The ones that sold out before noon. "Good morning," Caleb said. His eyes moved to the repaired absence behind the counter where the broken mug had been. "I brought these for the staff. Not as an apology. Just because the bakery was open." Benji appeared at Elliot's shoulder with supernatural speed. "As staff, I accept." Elliot gave him a look. Benji took the bag anyway and whispered, "For morale," before vanishing into the back room. Caleb's mouth twitched, but he wisely said nothing. Elliot wiped his hands on his apron. "Archives are in the rear storage room. We have 30 minutes before the book club ladies arrive, and they become territorial around the mystery shelf." "Understood," Caleb said, following him past towers of used novels, a squeaky rolling ladder, and Milo, who stepped directly into Caleb's path and sat down like a white furry toll booth. Caleb looked down. Milo looked up. Neither blinked. "Do I pay him?" Caleb asked. Elliot hated the warmth that flickered in his chest. Respect is usually enough. He is old-fashioned. Caleb crouched slowly, offered the back of his hand, and waited. Milo sniffed, considered him with grave suspicion, then bumped his head once against Caleb's knuckles. It was not approval, exactly, but it was not rejection either. Elliot told himself it meant nothing. In the storage room, dust floated in the pale winter light pouring through the small back window. Boxes lined the walls, labeled by year in Elliot's careful handwriting. Caleb unrolled the first set of plans across an old oak table, and Elliot forced himself to focus on measurements, permits, and photographs instead of the familiar angle of Caleb's hands. He had forgotten those hands. No, that was a lie. He had remembered them inconveniently for 10 years. The original balcony rail had brass detailing, Elliot said, pulling out a folder marked Starlight 1978. Most people forget that because it was painted black later. Caleb leaned closer, studying the photo. "You remember everything." Elliot kept his eyes on the folder. "I run an archive. Remembering is the job. Is it always useful?" The question was too gentle. Elliot looked up, and for a second the air between them changed. Caleb was not smiling now. He seemed tired beneath the calm, like a man standing in front of a locked door without knowing whether he had lost the key or thrown it away himself. "Not always," Elliot said. Caleb nodded, accepting the answer like he deserved the sting inside it. Then his gaze dropped to a faded photograph half hidden beneath the others. He pulled it free carefully. It showed the Starlight Theater on a summer night, the marquee glowing, teenagers clustered under the lights, and 2 boys at the edge of the frame. One was Elliot at 18, thinner, laughing, his head turned toward someone beside him. The other was Caleb, looking at Elliot instead of the camera. Caleb went completely still. The color drained from his face. "I know this," he whispered. Elliot's fingers tightened around the folder. "You should." Caleb touched the edge of the photo, not the image itself, as if afraid it might vanish. "I remember the lights," he said slowly. "And popcorn with too much butter. And you laughing because I said old movies were structurally predictable." Despite everything, Elliot heard himself say, they are not structurally predictable. You were just annoying. Caleb looked up then, and the soft surprise in his eyes was almost unbearable. I was annoying. Elliot swallowed. Very. A breath of laughter escaped Caleb, small and disbelieving, and for one brief second the storage room felt less like a graveyard of old things and more like a place where something buried had shifted, not alive yet, but no longer entirely dead. By noon, Blue Lantern books and coffee had become exactly what Elliot needed it not to be, busy, warm, and full of people who kept noticing Caleb Whitmore. Beth from the florist asked whether he was the architect from Boston, with the same tone people used for visiting celebrities and unexpected thunderstorms. Mr. Alvarez pretended to need help finding a biography on Frank Lloyd Wright while obviously studying Caleb over the top of his reading glasses. Benji, who had no sense of self-preservation, wrote "Mysterious Handsome Restoration Guy" on a paper cup and nearly got banned from the espresso machine for the rest of the week. Caleb handled all of it with polite discomfort, which made him more annoying, because Elliot had been prepared for arrogance and instead got a man who said thank you to everyone, held the door for a mother pushing a stroller, and moved a stack of heavy boxes without being asked when he saw Elliot favoring his left wrist. I could have done that, Elliot said as Caleb set the boxes beside the archive table. I know, Caleb replied. You were doing 4 other things. It was not flirtation. That was the problem. It was worse than flirtation. It was observation. Elliot had spent 10 years becoming hard to read, and Caleb had walked back in with damaged memories and somehow still knew where to look. After the lunch rush, the shop finally softened into its afternoon hush. Snow slid from the awning in heavy clumps. Milo slept on a pile of local history books. As if personally guarding Burlington's past. Elliot brewed himself tea, because a third coffee would make his hands shake for reasons he could blame on caffeine, and found Caleb at the front window, studying the old blue paint peeling along the frame. You are judging my windows now? Elliot asked. Caleb glanced back. Professionally, yes. And? They are beautiful. Elliot waited. Caleb added, and very drafty. That is the Vermont aesthetic. Freezing is not an aesthetic. Tell that to every tourist who buys a maple leaf postcard in February. Caleb smiled, and Elliot turned away too quickly, reaching for a rag that did not need reaching for. It would have been easier if Caleb had returned as a stranger with no familiar edges. Instead, he kept appearing in pieces Elliot recognized, the dry humor, the quiet patience, the way he listened without interrupting. Around 3, while Elliot was restocking the poetry shelf, Caleb brought over a small brass hinge from the front display case. This is loose, he said. Do you have a screwdriver? Back drawer. Caleb repaired it in under 2 minutes, kneeling on the wooden floor while Milo supervised with the severity of a building inspector. The sight should not have done anything to Elliot. It was a hinge. A tiny, stupid hinge. But the carefulness of it opened an old memory before Elliot could stop it. Caleb at 18, fixing the chain on Elliot's bike behind the Starlight Theater, grease on his fingers, laughing when Elliot accused him of showing off. Elliot shoved a book onto the shelf too hard, and 3 others slid sideways. Caleb looked up immediately. Are you all right? Elliot almost said yes. The word sat ready on his tongue, polished from years of use. Instead, he took a breath. You keep doing that. Caleb rose slowly. Doing what? Being helpful. Caleb looked honestly confused. Is that bad? It is when I do not know what to do with it. The shop went quiet around them, or maybe Elliot simply stopped hearing it. Caleb set the screwdriver on the counter with care. I am not trying to make you forgive me for something I do not understand yet. Elliot flinched. Caleb saw it and continued, softer. That came out wrong. I know there is something. I know because every time you look at me, you look like you are standing in front of a fire you already survived. Elliot's throat tightened. For a moment, he wanted to hand Caleb the whole ugly shape of it, the letter, the absence, the humiliation of waiting, the years of wondering what part of him had been so easy to abandon. But the bell rang before he could speak, and Nora Hayes swept in with snow on her red scarf and suspicion already sharpened in her eyes. She saw Caleb. Then she saw Elliot's face. Her smile vanished. "Well," Nora said carefully, setting down a paper bag of groceries. "I guess the past has great timing and terrible manners." Caleb stepped back, giving Elliot space without being asked. Nora noticed. Elliot noticed Nora noticing. That, somehow, made everything worse. "Nora," Caleb said, voice quiet. "It is good to see you." Nora folded her arms. "I wish I could say the same, but my brother cried into pancake batter for 3 months because of you, so I am going to need a minute." Elliot closed his eyes. "Nora." "What?" I rounded down. Caleb went pale, not theatrically, not defensively, just genuinely wounded by information he seemed to have no place to put. And Elliot, against every reasonable instinct he had left, felt the first dangerous crack in his anger widen into something far more complicated. Nora stayed for exactly 27 minutes, which was long enough to reorganize the pastry case, insult Benji's handwriting on the specials board, and make Caleb look like he was being interviewed for a position he had already failed 10 years earlier. Elliot tried to stop her twice. Both times, Nora ignored him with the confidence of a younger sister who had once seen him sob into a mixing bowl at 2 in the morning while trying to make banana pancakes from a recipe he no longer remembered starting. Caleb did not defend himself. That bothered Elliot more than any excuse would have. He stood beside the history shelf with his hands in the pockets of his coat, listening as Nora asked where he had been, why he had never called, why Elliot had to learn to stop waiting for footsteps that never came. Up the stairs. Each question landed softly because Nora was not cruel, but softness did not make them less heavy. Caleb answered only when he could. Boston. Then Chicago for graduate school. Then restoration work across New England. No, he did not know about the pancakes. No, he did not know Elliot had waited outside the hospital after the accident. At that, Nora went still. Elliot felt the room tilt. "What did you say?" Caleb asked, his voice suddenly thin. Nora looked from Caleb to Elliot, her anger flickering into confusion. "He went to see you," she said. 3 times. Your mother told him family only. Then one of your people said you had asked not to see him." Caleb's face lost every bit of color. "I never said that." Elliot let out a small, empty laugh. "You also said you could not build a future around me. So forgive me if I do not know which version to trust." Caleb looked at him as if the sentence had knocked the air out of the room. "What?" Elliot wished he had not said it. The words were out now, standing between them in all their old ugliness. Nora's expression softened with immediate regret. Benji, who had been pretending to polish spoons behind the counter, silently disappeared into the back room with the survival instincts of a smarter man. Elliot turned away, but Caleb spoke before he could retreat. "I did not write that." The shop seemed to shrink around them. The heater hummed. A car passed outside, tires whispering through slush. Milo jumped down from the radiator and padded under a table, as if even he knew the air had changed. Elliot stared at Caleb. "Do not do that. I am not trying to escape blame." "Then what are you doing?" "Telling you the truth as far as I know it." Caleb's voice shook on the last word, and that was new. Elliot had heard Caleb tired, careful, even wounded, but not frightened. Not like this. Nora reached for Elliot's arm, but he stepped back, already moving toward the narrow staircase that led to his apartment above the shop. He had not opened that box in years. He kept it under his bed behind winter blankets and old tax records, because some griefs became furniture if you left them in the same place long enough. When he came back down, he carried a faded blue shoebox with one corner crushed. Nora whispered his name, but Elliot shook his head. His hands were steady now in the unnatural way they became when something inside him was about to break but had decided to wait until later. He set the box on the counter and lifted the lid. Inside were movie tickets, a dried maple leaf, a silver keychain from the Starlight Theater, and the envelope. Cream paper. Caleb's name printed in the return corner. Elliot handed it to him without looking at the letter itself. Caleb took it like it was something fragile and dangerous. His eyes moved over the page once, then again, slower. A crease appeared between his brows. "This is not my handwriting," he said. Elliot folded his arms tightly across his chest. "Convenient." Caleb shook his head. "No. Look at the T in Whitmore. I never cross it like that. And I would not have typed your name as Mr. Hayes. I never called you that. Not even as a joke." Nora leaned over despite herself. "He is right," she murmured. Elliot wanted to tell her to be quiet, but the memory had already struck him. Caleb used to write his name in the margins of movie programs, always with a crooked E and an overdramatic loop on the Y because Elliot had once said it looked ridiculous. The letter had none of that. It was neat. Adult. Cold. Caleb lowered the paper, his eyes shining with a horror that did not feel performed. "Elliot," he said, barely audible, "someone wrote this for me." And in that moment, the story Elliot had survived for 10 years did not disappear, but it cracked straight down the middle. The letter stayed on the counter between them long after the afternoon crowd had thinned, looking smaller than a thing that had changed the course of 2 lives should have looked. Elliot kept staring at it as if it might rearrange itself into something kinder if he watched long enough. Caleb did not touch it again. Nora stood beside the pastry case with her arms folded, but her anger had gone quiet, replaced by the careful concern she used when Elliot was too close to a cliff and pretending he was only admiring the view. "I need air," Elliot said. No one stopped him. He grabbed his coat from the hook, stepped out into the cold, and walked toward the Starlight Theater because grief had a strange sense of direction. The theater sat 3 blocks away, half hidden behind snowbanks and temporary construction fencing. Its old marquee was dark, the red letters removed, the glass panels stacked inside like pieces of a dismantled memory. Caleb followed at a distance of about 20 feet, close enough that Elliot knew he was there, far enough that it did not feel like being chased. That, too, made Elliot angry in a quiet way. Caleb was learning the shape of his boundaries faster than Elliot could decide whether he wanted him to. At the theater entrance, Elliot stopped beneath the faded sign and looked up. The building had always been too dramatic for such a small town, with Art Deco curves, brass trim, and doors that used to shine under summer rain. Now it smelled like sawdust, cold metal, and the faint ghost of popcorn. Caleb unlocked the side door but did not go in first. He simply held it open. Elliot hated that he understood the gesture. Inside, the lobby was stripped down to its bones. Drop cloths covered the floor. Old movie posters leaned against the walls, waiting to be restored. Work lights glowed in soft pools, turning the dust in the air into something almost golden. Elliot remembered being 17 and sweeping this same floor after late showings, sneaking leftover candy into his backpack, pretending not to notice Caleb waiting outside with a bike and a grin. He walked past the ticket booth, fingers brushing the cracked marble counter. "I used to think this place knew us," he said before he could stop himself. Caleb's voice came from a few steps behind him. "Maybe it did." Elliot turned. "Do you remember any of that?" Caleb looked toward the dark entrance to the auditorium. "Pieces. Not enough. A red exit sign. Your laugh from somewhere behind me. A song from an old movie I could never name. Waking up in a hospital and feeling like I had forgotten how to breathe." Elliot's anger faltered, not gone, only unsteady. "Your mother said you did not want to see me." Caleb closed his eyes. "I remember asking for someone. I did not remember the name when I woke up fully, but I remember asking. Over and over. They told me I was confused. The words landed softly, but Elliot felt them everywhere. For years, he had built a version of Caleb who had chosen silence with clean hands and a clear mind. This Caleb looked like a man who had been handed an empty room and told it had always been empty. They walked into the auditorium together. Rows of seats waited under canvas covers. The screen hung at the front, pale and enormous, catching the work light like a sleeping moon. Elliot sat in the back row out of habit. Caleb noticed, of course. "This was your favorite spot," he said. Elliot looked at him sharply. Caleb touched his temple as if the memory had arrived with a headache. "You said you liked seeing everyone else react to the story. You said people were honest in the dark." Elliot could not speak for a moment. "That was not in any photograph. That was not in the letter. That was theirs." Caleb sat 2 seats away, leaving space between them. "I brought something," he said. From his coat pocket, he took out a small black sketchbook, worn at the corners. "I found it in a box at my apartment last night after I left your shop. I did not understand why I kept it until today." He handed it over. Elliot opened it carefully. The first pages were sketches of buildings, bridges, windows, then the Starlight Theater from different angles. Halfway through, the drawings changed. Elliot appeared in the margins, reading under the marquee, laughing over a paper cup of soda, asleep with his cheek against a stack of film posters. Under one sketch, Caleb had written in messy teenage handwriting, "After graduation, ask him to come with me." Elliot pressed his fingers to the page until the paper blurred. Caleb's voice broke quietly beside him. "I was not planning to leave you behind." Elliot closed the sketchbook, but he did not give it back. For the first time since Caleb returned, he let the silence stay without using it as a wall. The next week unfolded with the strange gentleness of a town pretending not to watch 2 people rebuild something in plain sight. Caleb returned to Blue Lantern every morning at 9. Never earlier, never with the confidence of someone entitled to stay. Sometimes he brought old permits from City Hall. Sometimes he brought coffee from Maple Street when Elliot's espresso machine acted possessed and Benji declared it emotionally unstable. Sometimes he only brought questions, careful ones, the kind that opened doors without pushing anyone through them. Elliot did not forgive him. Not yet. But he stopped asking him to leave. That felt dangerous enough. They spent afternoons sorting theater photographs by decade, evenings comparing paint samples under the shop's yellow lamps, and one ridiculous Tuesday arguing for 15 minutes about whether the restored lobby carpet should be deep navy or burgundy. Caleb said navy respected the original palette. Elliot said burgundy looked less like a bank. Benji sided with burgundy because, in his words, movies deserve drama underfoot. Milo chose navy by falling asleep on that sample, which Caleb treated as expert consultation. The laughter came before Elliot was ready for it, small and unwilling at first, then easier, slipping into the room like sunlight under a door. But every warm moment had a shadow. Caleb still remembered in fragments. A line of dialogue from a movie they had watched. The taste of orange soda. Elliot's old denim jacket. The way snow looked through the theater's front windows on the night before graduation. Each memory arrived like a gift wrapped in pain. Elliot wanted to be grateful. He wanted to be angry. Most days, he managed both before breakfast. 3 days before the reopening, Martha Whitmore came to the shop. She wore a camel coat, pearl earrings, and the kind of composed expression that made apology feel unlikely. The bell chimed, and the entire room changed temperature. Caleb was at the archive table repairing a torn seating chart with archival tape. When he saw her, his shoulders went still. Elliot knew that stillness. It was not fear exactly. It was the posture of a man preparing to be managed. "Caleb," Martha said. "You have not answered my calls." "I have been working." Her eyes moved to Elliot, polite and cool. "Mr. Hayes. Your shop is charming. It pays taxes too, Elliot said. Benji coughed behind the counter and suddenly became very interested in wiping the same mug for the third time. Martha's smile tightened. I hoped we could speak privately. Caleb stood. Anything you need to say can be said here. For the first time, Elliot saw something in Caleb that did not belong to memory loss or regret. He saw a grown man choosing where to stand. Martha looked at her son for a long moment, then removed a folded document from her handbag and set it on the counter. I made an offer on this building. A generous one. The owner is considering it. Elliot felt the floor drop away beneath him. The building owner lived in Florida and answered emails twice a year, but Elliot knew money spoke faster than loyalty. Why? He asked. Martha's gaze softened, and somehow that made it worse. Because this place is keeping my son trapped in a past that nearly destroyed him. Caleb's voice was quiet. No. This place is showing me what survived. Martha turned to him, her composure finally cracking around the edges. You do not remember what those months were like. You woke up screaming. You forgot streets you had known since childhood. You could not sleep unless the room was completely dark. I was your mother. I made choices because someone had to. You lied, Caleb said. Not loud. Not cruel. Just clear. Martha looked away. The silence after that word was heavier than shouting could have been. Elliot gripped the counter, not because he wanted to interrupt, but because some part of him was still 18, still waiting outside a hospital room he had never been allowed to enter. Caleb stepped closer to his mother, but kept his voice steady. You saved my life after the accident. I know that. I am grateful for that. But you do not get to decide which parts of my life were worth saving. Martha's eyes filled, though no tears fell. I thought I was protecting you. Caleb glanced at Elliot, then back at her. Maybe. But protection without truth can become a cage. No one moved. Outside, snow began again, soft against the windows. Martha picked up the document with trembling fingers and placed it back in her bag. The offer can be withdrawn, she said. Quietly. It was not an apology. Not fully. But it was the first brick removed from a wall that had stood for 10 years. When she left, Caleb did not follow. He stayed beside Elliot, close but not touching, while the shop slowly remembered how to breathe. The reopening of the Starlight Theater arrived on a Friday night wrapped in snow, warm lights, and the nervous energy of a whole town hoping an old building could become a new beginning. By 6 o'clock, Main Street looked like a postcard someone had decided to improve with movie music. Families walked in bundled coats and knitted hats, teenagers took pictures under the restored marquee, and the red letters above the entrance glowed for the first time in years, Friday Night Classics. Across the street, Blue Lantern stayed open late, serving hot chocolate in paper cups and maple cookies shaped like little stars. Benji wore a bow tie he claimed was vintage but had clearly bought that afternoon. Nora handed out programs with the intense focus of a school principal managing a fire drill, and Milo, against every health code in Vermont, sat in the front window wearing a tiny blue ribbon and judging the entire celebration. Elliot should have been happy. He was happy, in pieces. The theater was beautiful again. The shop had seen more customers in one night than it usually did in a week. The landlord had emailed that morning to say he was reconsidering the sale. Everything was moving toward hope, and still Elliot's hands shook when Caleb stepped outside beneath the marquee to check the final row of lights. He looked tired but proud, his hair brushed back, his dark coat open over a white shirt and navy tie. For a second, Elliot saw both versions of him at once, the boy with grease on his fingers fixing a bicycle chain, and the man who had spent the last week repairing what he could without demanding credit for it. Caleb caught his eye through the falling snow and smiled, not big, not certain, just there. Elliot looked away first because his heart still did not know the difference between a warning and a welcome. The first half hour went perfectly. People filled the lobby, admiring the old posters and brass railings. Mr. Alvarez cried quietly when he saw the restored balcony, then denied it so fiercely that Benji offered him a napkin for architectural allergies. The mayor gave a short speech about history, community, and local business resilience. Caleb stood near the wall, letting the praise pass around him. Elliot noticed that too. Once, Caleb would have hated being the center of attention but accepted it because his family expected brilliance from him. Now he seemed content watching the building receive the love instead. Then, just as the crowd settled into their seats and the opening music began, the lights flickered. Once. Twice. The screen went white. A soft wave of confusion moved through the auditorium. The emergency lamps blinked on, painting the walls in amber. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else said it felt authentic, like a real old theater experience. Caleb was already moving. Elliot followed before he decided to. "Backup projector room," Caleb said under his breath. "Top level." "I know," Elliot replied. "I worked here, remember?" Caleb glanced at him as they climbed the narrow stairs. "I am trying to." The words were so quiet Elliot almost missed them. The projection room smelled like dust, warm wiring, and metal. Caleb opened the panel while Elliot found the old manual switch near the back wall. Their shoulders brushed once in the tight space, and both of them went still, not because it was romantic, but because their bodies remembered 1,000 unsaid things their mouths were still afraid of. "Try it now," Elliot said. Caleb flipped the breaker. Nothing happened. Elliot stepped around a stack of film canisters and reached for the second switch, but his sleeve caught on a loose nail in the wall trim. When he pulled free, the old wallpaper tore with a soft rasp, revealing wood beneath. Caleb's flashlight swept over the exposed patch, then stopped. There, scratched into the beam in uneven teenage letters, were the words they had carved the night before graduation: C+E, when the lights come back. Caleb stared at it. The flashlight trembled in his hand. Elliot stopped breathing. Downstairs, the crowd murmured in the dark, but up there, time folded in on itself. Caleb pressed one hand against the wall as if the building had reached out and touched him first. "I remember," he whispered. His voice broke on the second word. "The rain that night. Your jacket was too thin. I gave you mine, and you said it smelled like cedar and laundry soap. We sat on the floor because the projector jammed, and you told me you were scared to leave Burlington because what if the world was only kind to people in movies?" Elliot's eyes burned. Caleb turned slowly, and something in his face had changed. Not fixed. Not whole. But awake. "I told you I would build us a place wherever we went," Caleb said. "I promised you would never have to feel like a side character in your own life." Elliot's hand covered his mouth, but the sound still escaped, small and wounded. Caleb did not move closer. He only said his name again, full of memory this time, full of sorrow, full of the boy he had been and the man trying to stand honestly in front of him now. Elliot sat down on the dusty floor because his knees could not hold 10 years anymore. He cried without elegance, without apology, without trying to make it quiet for anyone else. Caleb lowered himself to the floor 2 feet away, leaving space, offering presence instead of rescue. The lights below suddenly surged back to life, and applause rose from the auditorium like thunder softened by joy. Elliot laughed through the tears, broken and relieved all at once, because the whole town thought the miracle was the movie starting again, but Elliot knew the real miracle was that the darkest room in his life had finally let in light. For a long while after the applause began, Elliot and Caleb stayed on the floor of the projection room, not speaking, not touching, simply breathing in the same small pocket of light. Downstairs, the movie had started at last. Music drifted up through the vents, muffled and golden, the kind of old-fashioned orchestra swell that made even ordinary people feel as if their lives might still have a beautiful second act. Elliot wiped his face with the sleeve of his sweater and gave a shaky laugh. "I am very glad no one can see me right now." Caleb looked at him with a tenderness. So careful it did not ask for anything. For what it is worth, you are handling this better than the backup electrical panel. Elliot laughed again, and this time it sounded almost real. That was how the night ended, not with a dramatic kiss under the marquee or a perfect speech in front of the town, but with two men climbing down from the projection room with red eyes, dusty clothes, and a secret understanding that something old had finally been named. Nora took one look at Elliot and opened her arms without a word. Benji handed Caleb a paper cup of hot chocolate and said, "You look like you got emotionally restored too." Caleb, to his credit, only nodded and said, "That seems accurate." Over the next few weeks, Burlington settled into a new rhythm. Friday nights became movie nights at the Starlight, and after every showing, people crossed the snowy street to Blue Lantern for coffee, cocoa, and arguments about whether the book was better than the movie. The shop's bills were still real, but they were no longer impossible. The landlord signed a 2-year extension. Benji designed a terrible flyer that somehow brought in 20 new customers. Milo became the unofficial mascot of the theater lobby despite never once attending a film. Caleb stayed. Not with a grand announcement, not with a promise too big to trust, but with ordinary proof. He rented the small apartment above the old hardware store. He fixed the drafty front windows at Blue Lantern on a Sunday morning. He helped Mr. Alvarez repair a porch railing. He learned that Elliot hated phone calls before coffee, loved blueberry muffins warm, and still got nervous when people left without saying when they would come back. So Caleb always said it. "I am going to the hardware store. I will be back in 20 minutes. I have a meeting at City Hall. I will come by after lunch. I am heading home. I will see you tomorrow." Each small sentence stitched something quietly back together. Martha came once in early spring, without pearls, without documents, carrying a box of Caleb's old things she had found in storage. She apologized badly at first, then honestly. Elliot did not know if forgiveness would ever be simple. But he accepted the box, and that was enough for one afternoon. Inside was a photograph of two 18-year-old boys under the Starlight marquee, both laughing too hard at something already forgotten. Elliot placed it behind the counter, not on display, but not hidden either. On the first warm evening of April, when the last dirty piles of snow had melted from the curbs, Caleb walked into Blue Lantern just before closing. Elliot was wiping down the counter while Milo slept in the window, tail twitching over a stack of poetry books. Caleb held up 2 tickets for the late showing across the street. "I thought we could see the movie from the back row," he said. Elliot looked at the tickets, then at the man holding them. The past still hurt. Some mornings it probably always would. But it no longer stood between them like a locked door. It had become a room they could enter together, slowly, with the lights on. "Are we starting over?" Caleb asked. Elliot poured him a black coffee, no sugar, and set it beside the tickets. Then he smiled, small but steady. "No," he said. "We are starting honestly." Caleb's eyes softened, and this time, when they left the shop together, Elliot did not feel like he was following a memory. He felt like he was walking beside a future, uncertain and gentle and real. Across the street, the Starlight Theater glowed against the evening sky, its restored marquee bright enough to turn the sidewalk gold. Elliot locked the door, slipped the key into his pocket, and stepped into the light with Caleb at his side, believing, for the first time in 10 years, that some promises did not return to haunt you. Some returned because they were finally ready to be kept.